Hey guys, in this video we will be guiding you through Heroic Everbloom. Keep in mind the information in the footage in this video is from beta and is subject to change. Heroic Everbloom has a few of the more challenging boss encounters and quite a bit of trash. Be prepared to spend a little extra time in here initially. For the beginning trash, your highest priority mobs will be the Tenders. Tenders will cast and channel their enraged growth. This will empower nearby dread petals, increasing their damage done and attack speed. This needs to be interrupted. Dread petals will apply a poison that will stack up to 3 times, dealing nature damage over time to the tank. Naturalists will cast a barrage of leaves. If the cast is completed, it will channel onto its target, dealing nature damage. They will also cast Dancing Storms. This will apply a poison to its target and can be dispelled. Gnarl Root is a mini boss that you will encounter on your way to the first boss. He will periodically spawn little stationary tornadoes that will silence anyone standing in them. He will also cast Gasp, which is a frontal breathe that the tanks need to make sure he isn't facing towards party members. Healers need to be aware that the tank will be taking quite a bit of damage. Berserkers will leap to a random target and begin to channel Bounding Whirl. This is basically a whirlwind ability that you will need to move away from. It cannot be interrupted, but the Berserkers are stunnable. Verdant Mandragora are large plants that are sleeping. Dealing any damage to them will cause them to wake up and aggro to you. We ignored them and proceeded to the trash before the boss. For the trash packs right before the first boss, we chose to CC the Menders. They will cast Healing Waters. This needs to be interrupted. They will also cast Choking Vines. This ability will stun its target and deal nature damage over 10 seconds. Whither Bark is the first boss of the dungeon and is actually a lot simpler than he first appears. Tanks will need to position the boss as far away from the water as possible, facing him away from where your group is positioned due to his frontal cone attack called Parched Grasp. Ranged needs to position themselves as close to the cliff or wall for when he casts Unchecked Growth. This ability will target a random player, putting a green arrow above your head. You will have a little time to position yourself, but once the viney growth reaches you, it will spawn a poisonous vapor and vines that will deal ticking nature damage while standing in the area of effect. On Heroic, Whither Bark will continue to cast Unchecked Growth while under the effect of Brittle Bark. The reason you will need to position these as close to the cliff as possible is so they are out of the pathing of the aqueous globes that spawn when Whither Bark casts Brittle Bark. When Whither Bark is under the effect of Brittle Bark, he will be stunned and will take 100% increased damage. During this time, the aqueous globes will be spawning from the water, making their way towards Whither Bark. These will need to be killed, but not in rapid succession because they will deal AoE frost damage to the group. These cannot be rooted or stunned, but they can be slowed. If too many adds are spawned, you'll quickly be overrun, so it's best to position the growths as far out of the way as possible. When the water globules reach Whither Bark, they will give him 25 energy. Once Whither Bark reaches 100 energy, he will become active again and continue with his normal abilities. In retrospect, it is probably only worth killing the first wave of globules. The time needed to control the subsequent waves nets almost no boss damage. Also be aware that the water from the nearby lake will periodically launch a bolt of water at a player's location. Upon impact, it will deal a moderate amount of frost damage to anyone within 3 yards. You will see a blue swirl under your feet that can be overlooked, but it is avoidable. On your way to the second boss encounter, you will run into a new mob called Twisted Abomination. They will put a poison on a tank and will also cast triple attack, where the abomination will strike 3 times in succession to anyone in front of it. This deals minor damage to the tank. They will also cast Noxious Eruption, and this will deal AoE damage and knock back any nearby enemies. Be sure to not have your back to any trash packs you plan to skip. The next boss of the dungeon is the Ancient Protectors. This fight is a 3-boss council fight. On Heroic, when one of the Protector's abilities is interrupted, that Protector will become immune to all crowd control and interrupt effects for 8 seconds. Only a few of the abilities are worth interrupting, however. Gola is a healer who can empower his allies with Rapid Tides. This ability will empower Gola or one of his allies, removing cooldowns from all of their abilities. It is essential to interrupt this ability. This ability can and should be dispelled if it is not interrupted. He will also cast Revitalizing Water. This will heal himself or an ally for 15% of their health. We would advise using any abilities that will reduce the amount of healing received on Gola in case this ability is used on himself. If unavailable, it will just take a bit longer to get him down. Gola will constantly cast Water Bolt, dealing a moderate amount of nature damage to a random target. You will want to utilize any personal cooldowns or special abilities to try and avoid this damage if you find yourself being targeted frequently. You will not want to interrupt this ability. Telu will protect allies with Briar Skin. This protects himself or an ally for 8 seconds. This effect reduces all damage taken by 75% and inflicts nature damage to attackers. This ability also needs to be removed from the target, especially if it is placed on your focus target. If left unchecked, your DPS will easily kill themselves. Your tank should be interrupting this ability. He will also cast Bramble Patches at the feet of random players. This patch will last for 45 seconds and deal nature damage every 1 second and will slow anyone caught in it. Telu will continuously cast Nature's Wrath. Similar to Gola's Water Bolt, you will want to utilize any personal cooldowns or special abilities to try and avoid this damage if you find yourself being targeted too frequently. You do not want to interrupt this ability. Dulu will leap at random targets with his ability Rending Charge. This will apply a bleed effect to the target, dealing physical damage every second for 15 seconds. Be aware of Dulu's ability Grasping Vine. This will pull a random player towards him, slashing them. Slash will deal a large amount of physical damage to anyone in front of him. If you are pulled, you will need to run away immediately to avoid taking damage from this ability. He will cast Noxious Eruption, much like the Abomination's ability on the trash before this encounter. This ability will deal AoE damage to anyone within 10 yards, knocking them back. Also be aware if a melee class is a designated interrupter on Gola, they will get pulled away, preventing them from being able to get the interrupt. Having a backup interrupter will handle this issue if it occurs. The strategy we used involved focusing down Gola with the tank holding Dulu and Telu off to the side. The tank should be focusing on Telu and waiting to interrupt Briar Skin. Meanwhile, the DPS should be interrupting Gola's Rapid Tide so that he doesn't gain the ability to spam his heal. If Rapid Tides is cast, it needs to be dispelled from whichever boss it was cast on immediately. Once Gola dies, the fight gets significantly easier. You will run into an infested Venom Fang spider if you choose to kill the optional boss, Zeratak. The Venom Fang will cast Spore Breath, which is a frontal cone ability that will need to be faced away from your group. Heroic Everbloom is the only Warlords of Draenor dungeon with an optional boss. Unfortunately, it has been broken for almost the entire beta, so we were not able to test this boss. On the way to the third boss, you will encounter some new mobs that have some new abilities to watch out for. Ice Callers are basically frost mages who will frequently cast frost bolts. They will also cast Frozen Snap, which will place some small frosty patches on the ground. If you are caught standing in them when they activate, you will be frozen and stunned for several seconds. Pyromancers are similar to fire mages who will continuously cast Fireball. Watch out for their Dragon's Breath, as this will deal fire damage and disorient any players caught in the breath for several seconds. This ability can and should be interrupted. Arcanomancers are your typical arcane mage who continuously cast Arcane Blast. The ability you need to watch out for is their Black Hole ability. This will need to be interrupted, otherwise it will pull you towards it and deal periodic damage if you are caught in its grasp. After killing any of these mages, they will spawn a spore image of themselves that will use the same abilities. Archmage Soul is the next boss you will fight, and you'll need to do some tricky positioning changes to make this fight a bit easier. The Archmage will start off casting fire spells. There are only 2 abilities that are specific to this stance. Fireball is her basic attack that she will use on the tank. This deals a moderate amount of damage, but isn't very important. She will also cast Fire Bloom, spawning a fiery plant at the feet of a random ranged member. These will periodically shoot out a ring of fire around it, traveling roughly 30 yards and dealing damage to anyone it hits. This ability can be avoided by simply jumping over it. Be aware that it does get quite a bit harder as more fire blooms are spawned. Archmage Soul will occasionally cast Parasitic Growth. This ability will increase her damage and casting speed by 50% per stack if successfully cast. This can be interrupted, however, choosing when to interrupt this ability is key to success for this fight. Whenever this ability is interrupted, Soul will gain a 50% damage increase, but will then change to the next phase, using a different school of magic. Once she changes to the next stance, she will lose any stacks of Parasitic Growth that she gained from the previous stance. Whenever Soul switches to the next school of magic, a spore image will spawn, randomly casting the previous stance's filler spell at the party. These simply just need to be tanked, they have far too much health to kill. Soul's second stance will have her casting frost spells. Soul will cast Frostbolt on the tank, which is just like Fireball. Ignore it unless you have the interrupts to spare. She will also cast blizzards in random locations around the area. These deal a significant amount of damage to anyone standing in them and should be avoided at all costs. Soul's last stance will have her spamming Arcane Burst, dealing a large amount of arcane damage to the entire group. These are very healing intensive. The strategy we used for this fight was to start off on the far side of the platform for the fire phase. We would allow her to cast 1 Parasitic Growth, extending the fire phase a bit longer, thus delaying the arcane phase, which was the ultimate goal. Once we interrupted her second cast of Parasitic Growth, we quickly moved to the other side of the area, allowing us to completely ignore the fire blooms for the rest of the fight. We followed the same process for the Frost version, allowing 1 cast of Parasitic Growth and then interrupting the second. This left Soul nearly dead once she transitioned to Arcane, allowing us to squeeze out the kill. The trash after Archmage Soul can be skipped if you pass by when the pad is far enough out of the way. YALL is the final boss of the instance and is much easier than the other bosses in here. Shortly after running through the portal, the boss will engage. You will need to watch out for targets that are affected by entanglement. On Heroic, party members can now be targeted with this ability. Entanglement is when YALL entraps a random target. This will stun the target and inflict nature damage every second until the entanglement is destroyed. DPS will need to switch to the entanglement immediately, especially if it entraps a party member. YALL will summon adds throughout the fight. Tanks will need to pick these adds up and drag them to the flame strikes on the ground that are placed by Kirintor NPCs. The Swift Sproutling will use an ability called Tendon Rip, slowing their target's movement speed by 5% for 6 seconds while inflicting additional bleed damage every second. This ability can stack. The Vicious Mandragora will cast Noxious Breath. This is a frontal cone ability dealing nature damage to anyone caught in front of it. Their Gnarled Ancients will crush all players in front of them, dealing a large amount of physical damage. Watch out for YALL's Colossal Blow. This is a telegraphed slam on the ground, dealing a devastating amount of physical damage to all enemies in front of him and stunning them for 5 seconds. This can easily be avoided. When YALL casts Genesis, all party members will need to quickly step on any sprouting lashers to trample them and prevent them from becoming full grown. Once the channel is complete, any sproutlings that were not trampled will grow into feral lashers. If you do end up with any Feral Lashers, they will spit venom at random players. These need to be picked up by the tanks. We hope you've enjoyed this video and found the information helpful to you and your group. If you're interested in more heroic dungeon guides and want to know more about our team, check out the links provided in the description below.